Yo, people, welcome back to On Track GP. I'm joined by Thomas from Planet F1. First of all, how are you doing, Thomas? How are you?
Hi, Matisse. How's it going? I'm very well. Thanks for asking. It's been a pretty busy Saturday, obviously, with the FP3 session a little bit earlier on in wet conditions, and then qualifying five red flags, I think, in the course of today. So, yeah, there's been plenty of chaos, plenty of action, and lots to discuss, I think, from today's action.
Yeah, very stop-start, very up and down. I think there was no real continuity, I guess, throughout the session, and especially in the final one, there was just obviously the damp parts of the track, timing from the teams getting it a bit wrong at times. Leclerc was kind of saying earlier on in the session, saying, "Listen, you guys need to step on this because otherwise we could have ended up going out in Q1." So yeah, I think in Q3, listen, what did you make of Verstappen's performance? Because we got to start there. He's on pole and he kind of pulled out the bag again because it felt like McLaren had a really good position where they were, putting up some great times, and it wasn't evident. It wasn't clear to me, at least, that Verstappen was necessarily going to get that break.
In conditions like we've had today, timing pretty much is everything. And for a split second, it looked like the timing might actually go against Verstappen today, because obviously he was on a quick lap at the time of the final red flag in Q3, and he lost that lap as a result. And it kind of looked at that moment like, this might actually go against Verstappen for once because of that time being ruined. So obviously we saw Charles Leclerc crashing his Ferrari with 4 minutes to go. And that just meant all the pressure is now on that final flying lap. Everyone has to perform. But of course, the two McLarens had already put in their times. So it was a case of, can anyone gather it all back up on the final run? And as we've seen so often in Formula One in 2023, Red Bull, Verstappen, they did pull it out of the bag. Verstappen did put in that amazing final lap, and it ended up half a second quicker than Lando Norris. That is a very, very impressive performance to pull out of the bag, especially considering that he didn't even put in the fastest first sector. That, of course, is going to Lando Norris. Yeah. So we had 6 different cars in the top 6. That's pretty unusual, I think, in Formula One in 2023. So, a very, very exciting session. And I think that the race tomorrow is going to be a bit of a spectacle, I think.
Yeah, we always say on here, listen, if you can just watch everything that happens behind Verstappen in a race, you're going to be greatly entertained. Sticking on Red Bull in terms of Perez, obviously starting in 7th. What do you kind of put it down to his performance this season? Obviously, we've seen him come from quite far back in the grid due to previous poor qualifying performances, and then managed to sometimes take it up to podium positions where he's kind of expected to be regardless with the speed of that car. But do you think it's more Verstappen just being, a generational kind of top driver, and Perez, or is it Perez just not performing to the level, or maybe a combination of both? Because to have first and like I said, 5 tenths clear, and then someone else in 7th in the same car, if this was a Rosberg and a Hamilton of old, or it's kind of unacceptable, really.
It's kind of down, in terms of acceptance, it's kind of down to what Red Bull view as acceptable or not. And there are increasing signs, I think, that Red Bull aren't finding Perez's performance level acceptable. The thing is, you would say if it was a one-off performance, you would say, okay, fair enough, it's down to conditions or whatever. But the thing is, with Perez, it's consistent the whole way through the year. Throughout their 3 years nearly together, this has been a consistent gap between the two drivers. Verstappen is obviously that generational talent. He's molded the team around him. He's got the personality to be able to be that talismanic leader of a team. While for Sergio Perez, we've seen it so often in the past with drivers who get this, step up to a top team. Because Perez, apart from that year with McLaren 10 years ago, he's always been mired in the midfield with midfield teams. So he's been expected to step up to the plate with Red Bull. And sometimes we see that he's capable of doing it, but only generally when the pressure's not really there. Once the pressure starts to build, once expectation starts to build on him, he's just not quite able to do what Verstappen is able to do, to the point where he doesn't even perform to the capability of the car or to himself. Because we all know Perez is better than a lot of the performances he's put in this year. But it's like he gets inside his own head. And that's when he starts making mistakes. That's when he starts screwing up. And that's what we've seen, I think, on a consistent basis this year. The only way I think Perez is going to absolutely maximize his potential is full acceptance of the fact that Verstappen is the better driver, and just basically drive to the capability of the car. Don't try to exceed it. Don't try to keep up with Max. Just do what you do best and come home in second place. And I think everything would work out much better for Sergio then, because obviously there are a lot of rumors now about, his future, whether the likes of Daniel Ricciardo, pre his injury yesterday, obviously, whether he might be able to shout, or, even someone like Liam Lawson getting the nod ahead of Perez.
Yeah, who we're seeing this weekend, and we'll definitely talk about Liam Lawson later. Obviously, tough session for him in qualifying, obviously starting at the back, but kind of he not expected to be involved in this race up until yesterday. So it would just be interesting to see how he does in that AlphaTauri, obviously tomorrow, alongside Tsunoda. But I wanna also discuss on the fact that there's a big gap between the Mercedes as well. Hamilton going out in Q2, Russell sitting on the second row in third. A brilliant day for him, I think, to kind of put himself in that position. It's been a tough qualifying, like you said, with the timings and the temperature as well with the tires. I felt like there was a little bit of grip lost in parts of qualifying as well today, where kind of people bobbing and weaving and swerving, and we saw a few collisions with the barriers as well. What do you make of that gap between the two Mercedes, and what do you put that down to as well?
It's tough to tell at the moment. I haven't actually seen any of the post-qualifying reaction just yet as to what went on for both drivers. Obviously, in Q1, we saw Hamilton getting caught up in a few impeding incidents in Q1 that I think the stewards are largely going to turn a blind eye to, because, on such a short track of only something like 70, 80 seconds length, squeezing 20 drivers onto that piece of track is... it's pretty difficult to do without encountering traffic. So I think Hamilton was on the back foot a little bit, and then he mistimed his final run in Q2. I think he put in his best lap, just maybe a lap or two too early, because obviously conditions were still improving in the wet. If it had been a fully dry session, well, we've kind of seen that over recent races, Hamilton has had the advantage over Russell to a much greater extent. Ever since those upgrades came on song for Mercedes back in Monaco, we've seen Hamilton having that advantage over Russell. And I don't think there's any real reason to believe that momentum wouldn't have continued in qualifying in a dry session. So it is good to see Russell, though, finally kind of, perk himself up a little bit. He's had a bit of a poor mid-season, not quite able to keep up with what Lewis has been doing in the upgraded W14. So, but points are won on Sunday. So we'll have to wait and see what actually happens in the Grand Prix itself.
100%. I wanna talk about the overperformance potentially, and maybe the best thing about that Q3 was the Williams double both cars in the top 10. Albon in a fantastic position. He was showing that consistency throughout qualifying, as putting in brilliant laps. He starts in fourth, and Sargent taking Stroll in the Aston Martin, obviously his teammate Alonso in fifth, starting tomorrow. Sargent making himself placing himself in the top 10 for the first time. Is this something that you've kind of been seeing from Williams, where we've been speaking about Albon really all season as someone that's really, maybe, I don't know if he's outperforming that car, or do they now have a genuinely quick car? What do you feel about Williams' performance?
Williams are just an enigma, I think, this year. There have been hints throughout the year that Williams isn't terrible. James Vowles, obviously the team boss, said coming into the weekend that the car they're racing now is going to be the car they have for the rest of the year. There's not going to be any more upgrades. He is fully committed to thinking long term. This is a case of the car is going to change fundamentally for next year. He's thinking in terms of 2025, 2026. This is a long term thing. So there's going to be no short term push from Williams. There's going to be no further development this year. And the consensus was that Williams are not that competitive, that they are one of the bottom kind of maybe three cars or so. And I saw just before we came on air that Alex Albon had actually said that he predicted Williams were going to be terrible this weekend. So they're clearly not terrible. And the thing is, what's particularly interesting is that, okay, we kind of thought that Williams were going to be quick in a low downforce, low drag scenario, like maybe at Monza, as we saw last year. But Zandvoort is not a low drag, low downforce circuit. It is a circuit that requires, reasonable levels of downforce. It requires a fairly agile chassis. It requires good grip, good drive, good traction. And for Williams to actually show up and be this competitive, regardless of the conditions, whether it be dry, whether it be damp, whether it be wet, they have been consistently up there. And the thing is, while Albon has had the legs on Logan Sargent, Sargent has gone with him. We saw Sargent getting into the top 10 for the first time in his F1 career until he binned it. But by and large, it's been an incredibly impressive performance from Williams. And it's just going to be really interesting to see how they do over the remainder of this year, because for them to be able to do this with a car that they say no further development is happening on between now and the end of the year, you kind of think maybe seventh in the Constructors' Championship is doable. And what I've been most impressed by with James Vowles is obviously he's bringing the lessons he's learned from Mercedes over the last couple of years. He's bringing that to Williams. Maybe they've been guilty in the past of chasing short-term success, and he's trying to change that mindset into, we want to focus on the medium term, we want to focus on the long term. And I really think this is a bit of a turning point for Williams. Maybe not this weekend, like exactly, but I think that this shift in mindset that they're going through at the moment, I think this could be a turning point for Williams in the long run.
And building on from that, obviously tomorrow, what do you expect from this race outside of Verstappen in terms of cars vying for that top 10 position? Because I've been kind of disappointed a bit by Alpine this season. We saw Gasly going out in Q2, Ocon going out in Q1. Obviously, they had a pretty quick car last year, overtaken by Aston Martin. Maybe to everybody's shock, just how much that investment really propelled them in the early parts of the season, with Alonso getting consistent podiums. And then obviously we've got, Tsunoda, who had really good start to the IFL, and done quite well in that AlphaTauri. Obviously, Liam Lawson, I'm looking forward to seeing what he does tomorrow. But he was kind of contesting for that 10th place, and it was kind of an ongoing joke in the end that he was sometimes just missing out of that final point when really probably deserved more. And we've seen even Hulkenberg, good qualifying, in sessions in previous races as well, in that Haas in 15th. So because of, like you said, the fact that the top half of this grid is just all different cars, the back end as well, I don't really know what to expect in terms of who's going to be performing and who's going to potentially, take those places, maybe even in the opening lap. What's your expectations?
See, this is the thing. If you actually ignore Max Verstappen, it is quite unpredictable. It's really difficult to gauge who is actually up there. Who I would say is definitely up there is McLaren. I think the upgrades they've brought to the MCL 60 over the last kind of 2-3 months have really propelled them forward. And yes, they've admitted that the low drag circuits are not going to suit them. They do still have a low drag weakness. But by and large, that MCL 60 has taken a huge leap forward. So I'm expecting Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri to be consistently up near Red Bull. Maybe not near Red Bull, but the closest rivals to Verstappen between now and the end of the season. And what I'm expecting is that they are currently 5th in the Constructors' Championship, but I think they're going to be closing the gap down to maybe even 2nd and 3rd by the time that the season actually wraps up. I think Mercedes and Ferrari, they're kind of much in a muchness, but I think Mercedes still have the advantage of being operationally sharper than Ferrari. Ferrari are obviously going through this transitionary phase in their path back to the top. Fred Vasseur molding the team in his image. So I'm expecting Mercedes to come out on top of that Ferrari battle. Aston Martin, I think, have kind of lost their way a little bit through the season, and I think this is purely symptomatic of the fact that they don't have a whole lot of experience as being a front-running team. I think they're getting used to having ample resources. I think they're getting used to having all these new shiny things, having lots of money to spend, under Lawrence Stroll. They've got the brand new factory, which, by the way, is just beautiful. It's amazing to see the Aston Martin factory. But I think it's going to be a while before they figure out we are now a front-running team and how best to actually keep up there. I think they've had their moment for 2023. I think it's going to be maybe just trying to keep the ship steady for the rest of the year and then maybe return back in 2024 with the lessons they've learned from this year. You mentioned Alpine. Alpine are just really, really difficult to gauge. They've
got a good lineup as 2 drivers. I really like the lineup that they have, and obviously we know the fiasco of last year, Alonso leaving, Oscar Piastri kind of falling away as well, the drama there. But I don't know, it's almost like they've kind of been caught in the middle, and they haven't necessarily kind of improved. But I still see them as a decent outfit. But it's strange.
Alpine are just they're caught up in. I don't even know how to describe it. They just don't really seem to know how to progress. And obviously
Yeah.
they had that really tumultuous period just before the
Yes.
summer break with replacing Otmar Safnauer. They've now got an interim team boss in the shape of Bruno Famin, who's come on board as a vice president for Alpine Motorsport. So they're going through this transitionary phase. They've got Pierre Gasly and Esteban Ocon, who are, they're proven race winners. They might not be world champion material. I think we'll have to wait and see a little bit longer. But they are solid upper midfield drivers who I think are capable of making the step up to being front-running drivers if the machinery allows. But right now, the machinery doesn't really seem to be allowing for it. We obviously saw Ocon coming home third in Monaco. There's been flashes of speed from both Gasly and Ocon. But by and large, they just seem to be absolutely mired in and around the midfield, the top half of the bottom of the midfield. It's a very strange position that they're in. And obviously we saw Ocon having a tough day at the office today during qualifying. I think they've just got to try and aim for more consistent points finishes, because it's kind of hard to gauge whether they're going to be 5th one weekend and then 15th the following weekend.
Yeah.
Their pace fluctuations are incredibly vast. And I don't really understand why. And the thing is, I don't think they really understand why either. And I think that's maybe why, there's been so much change going on in the background and in upper management. I think Renault have just lost kind of faith in the direction of the team. So it'll be interesting to see how they get on over the rest of the year and whether the changes will have any impact. AlphaTauri as well, you mentioned, I think they're going to be treading water between now and the end of the year. They're having a really tough season, AlphaTauri. The car isn't that great. Nick de Vries obviously had his troubles. They brought in Daniel Ricciardo, and then immediately we lost Daniel Ricciardo again due to a broken bone in his hand. Yuki Tsunoda's doing well, but now we've got the rookie Liam Lawson as well. And Liam is really, really going to struggle, I think, to have an immediate impact in the car. It's a tough car to drive. He's been thrown in at the deep end. I think he'll have very, very little impact on this race. Maybe a little bit more next week at Monza. But I think it's just there's a new dawn coming for AlphaTauri next year. New team boss, new CEO. Franz Tost is leaving after 17 years. I think the full rebrand, the whole ethos at AlphaTauri, I think is going to change next year. Okay. And I think just between now and then, I think it's just going to be about biding their time, really.
Yeah, and I think the same applies to Alfa Romeo, but maybe even longer term, waiting for the Audi transition, because Alfa Romeo just seem to be vibing. They're just there. They're not really getting into the points. They're not making any strides. Bottas is, I don't know, it feels like the latter part of maybe Kimi's era. That might be a disrespect to Kimi, to be honest. Like Bottas is just, he's just there.
That's a good way of viewing it. It's like, you've got all these battles going on, and Alfa Romeo were there too. Yeah, it's they just happen to be on the grid, but are not really making that much of an impact. And I think as well, there's the unknown of knowing that Valtteri Bottas never really lit the F1 world alight during his Mercedes years. We always knew that Hamilton was capable of more pace, of extracting more pace. So if Bottas is the quicker of the Alfa Romeo drivers, then surely that means with a quicker driver, there's another couple of tenths still in the car. We don't know exactly how good Zhou Guanyu is. Like he's a mature guy, he's a calm guy, he's solid, but is he great? And that's the tough thing to guess. And you alluded to the end of Kimi Räikkönen's era. This is what concerns me, because we always talked about the pedigree that Fred Vasseur has brought. It was under Fred Vasseur that Alfa Romeo became quite stagnant.
Yeah,
it was under Fred where Alfa Romeo slipped from kind of being in the midfield to being further at the back. So it's more Vasseur's pedigree in junior categories that stands to what he's achieved in the past. In terms of Formula One, I'm not as convinced by Vasseur. And now obviously there's Alessandro Alunni Bravi, who's assumed the mantle of the team boss role, even if he hasn't got it officially. But it is very much a transitionary phase as well for Alfa Romeo. They're going to be Sauber again next year. Then we've got 2 years of Sauber, and then Audi come on board. So it very much like AlphaTauri, but on a longer term, period of treading water. I think we're going to have at least probably another 2 years of Alfa Romeo, not of Sauber, not really doing a whole lot.
Yeah, I agree with you. And it's a shame because there's always got to be that one team that, it was Williams for a while with Latifi, where you just couldn't put really anything together on paper, and you just were kind of just waiting for the improvement. But it's going to be a season or two minimum before you actually see anything competitive. But there's always got to be a team back there. Someone's always got to be last. I'll get your quick top 3 prediction for tomorrow in terms of first, second, and third. What are you hedging your bets on?
Okay, the only person who can stop Verstappen is Verstappen himself.
Yep.
So I'm going to say that Max will romp the race. I don't think there's anything that can really stop him, even if it rains. Nothing. Lando Norris, I'm going to put into second place, and I would say third will go to. I think Lewis Hamilton will produce maybe third place. I'm expecting. A bit of a run.
It's a long way to come through the field, isn't it?
It is, but I think he'll pull something out of the bag. I think there'll be safety cars tomorrow. I think you can't go from 5 red flags in one day to an absolutely smooth day. So I think there'll be a little bit of chaos tomorrow. Something will happen. Lewis will come back into the running, and I think Lewis will come out maybe in around third place. The only reason I think he'll beat Russell is just due to that, as I mentioned, that the slight pace advantage that Lewis has had over George through the mid part of the season. I think that'll play out, as well in the race tomorrow.
Well, it's about time, to be honest, if we do get red flags, because we didn't really have much before the summer break. It was almost too quiet, and now they're all kind of coming together in this a massive combustion. But listen, Thomas, it's absolute pleasure doing this qualifying review with you guys. Make sure you smash up the likes. Make sure you subscribe. Of course, make sure you check out the website as well. Link is always in the description. And we will see you for tomorrow's race, for the watch along with me, Abby, and I think Sam will be there also. So I'm very much looking forward to it. Until then, in a bit, people. Peace.